6 miles down, the ocean turns into a place that should kill anything alive. No light, no warmth. Pressure heavy enough to crush a truck into the size of a soda can. You would think nothing survives there, but something does. Deep inside the Mariana Trench, past the point where sunlight ever reaches, strange creatures move through total darkness like it's nothing. A fish with a skull that bends instead of breaking. Giant amoebas the size of your fist. Shrimp-like scavengers swarming through blackness, drawn to anything that falls from far above. We're heading somewhere humans can barely reach. A funnel that pulls in the ocean's leftovers. A trench that hides chemicals scientists now test to fight disease. A pressure so extreme it once turned a human submarine into a warning story. If you're into deep sea mysteries like this, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what's coming next. Because 6 miles down isn't empty. It's full of life that shouldn't exist. Prepare yourselves. We begin. A ship drops a metal frame into the Pacific Ocean and watches it disappear. That frame keeps sinking, past where fish swim near the surface, past where whales dive for food, past where submarines patrol during wartime. It keeps going down for over an hour before it ever touches bottom. This is the Mariana Trench, a crack in the ocean floor near Guam that drops 6 miles straight down. Stack Mount Everest at the bottom of this trench, and the peak would still sit over a mile underwater. It is the deepest place on planet Earth, deeper than any canyon, deeper than any cave, deeper than anywhere a human can walk. Scientists call the very bottom of this trench the Challenger Deep. The name comes from a British ship called the HMS Challenger, the first crew to measure how deep this crack actually goes. That was back in 1875. They used a rope and a weight, dropping it over the side and waiting to feel it hit bottom. It took hours. When the numbers came back, nobody believed the ocean could go that deep. They were right to be shocked. The trench formed where two massive plates of the Earth's crust collide. One plate slides underneath the other, diving down into the planet like a ramp built from solid rock. This process is called subduction, and it happens in slow motion, just a few inches every year. But over millions of years, that slow grinding carved out a gash in the ocean floor deep enough to swallow a mountain range. Here's where it gets stranger. As you drop deeper into this crack, the ocean fights back. Every 33 feet you descend, the water pressure increases by the weight of Earth's entire atmosphere pressing down on you. By the time you reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that pressure reaches over 16,000 pounds per square inch. Picture 50 jumbo jets, all stacked on top of a single spot the size of your hand. That is what 6 miles of ocean feels like, pressing down every second in every direction. A human body dropped into this pressure without protection wouldn't explode. It would do something worse. It would get crushed inward, folded in on itself in an instant before your brain could even register pain. You would think this rules out life completely. No sunlight, freezing cold, pressure that turns steel unreliable, every reason to expect nothing but empty rock and endless black water. But when the first submarine reached the bottom of this trench back in 1960, the crew looked out through a tiny window into the darkness. They expected mud, maybe a few strange particles floating past. Instead, they saw something swim by. A flat fish, gliding along the ocean floor 6 miles beneath the surface, in a place where scientists had insisted nothing could survive. That single sighting broke every rule science had written about the deep ocean. If a fish could live here, something about survival itself needed to be rewritten. What kind of body could withstand pressure that crushes steel? The answer waiting in the darkness below was stranger than anyone expected. Sunlight is fast. It travels 93 million miles from the sun to reach your skin in about 8 minutes. But sunlight is also weak once it hits water. The ocean swallows light almost as fast as it arrives. Drop below 600 feet, and the ocean around you shifts into a strange twilight zone. Sunlight still exists here, but it's faint, blue, and useless for anything trying to see clearly. Colours start disappearing first. Red vanishes almost immediately once you're underwater, swallowed up within the first 30 feet, then orange fades, then yellow. By the time you reach 600 feet down, only a dim blue-grey light remains, like standing outside right after sunset. Keep dropping, and even that thin blue light gives up. Past 3,000 feet, sunlight disappears completely. Scientists call this the midnight zone, and it makes up the majority of the ocean on planet Earth. No light ever reaches here. Not from the sun, not from the moon, not ever, in the entire history of this planet. Now imagine dropping 5 more miles past that point into the Mariana Trench. This is darkness beyond what your eyes have ever experienced. Close your eyes right now in a lit room, and light still leaks through your eyelids. In the Mariana Trench, there is no light to leak. Scientists who've travelled there in submarines describe it as a blackness that feels physical, like the dark is pressing against the windows. Here's the strange part. Total darkness usually means total emptiness. Sunlight drives almost every food chain on Earth. Plants use sunlight to grow. Animals eat plants. Bigger animals eat those animals. Remove sunlight, and you'd expect that entire chain to collapse into nothing. Yet the Mariana Trench isn't empty. Life down here just plays by different rules. Some creatures glow in the darkness, using a trick called bioluminescence to create their own light from chemical reactions inside their bodies. Others have given up on eyesight completely, evolving without any need for eyes at all. And some, like the fish spotted by that first submarine crew, rely on other senses entirely, brushing past prey using touch and vibration instead of sight. Without sunlight, these creatures can't rely on plants to survive, so evolution built a workaround. Instead of a food chain that starts with sunlight, the Mariana Trench runs on a food chain that starts with chemicals, bacteria, and scraps falling from far above. This isn't a broken ecosystem struggling to survive. It's a completely different survival system built from scratch, in a place sunlight will never reach. But sunlight isn't the only thing missing down here. As you drop deeper past the midnight zone, another force multiplies with every foot you fall, one that makes darkness look like the easy part. Try pressing your hand against a swimming pool wall. You'll feel a small push against your skin. Now imagine that same push, multiplied thousands of times over, squeezing every inch of your body at once. That's what waits at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Water pressure builds fast the deeper you go. Every 33 feet underwater adds another full unit of atmospheric pressure, the same amount of force the entire sky presses down on you right now while you're reading this. At the surface you feel 1 unit of pressure. It's normal. Your body evolved to handle it perfectly, but drop deeper and the units start stacking. By 100 feet you're feeling 4 times normal pressure. By 1,000 feet, over 30 times normal pressure. Scuba divers rarely go past 130 feet, because beyond that, pressure starts messing with the human brain, causing confusion and poor decisions. Now multiply that all the way down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 6 miles below the surface. The pressure there reaches over 16,000 pounds per square inch. Numbers like that don't mean much on their own, so picture this instead. A jumbo jet weighs around 400,000 pounds, fully loaded with passengers and fuel. Now stack 50 of those jets directly on top of each other, balanced on a single point the size of your palm. That crushing weight, that exact force, is what presses against every square inch of the Mariana Trench floor, every second, without stopping. Steel submarines built for this depth need walls several inches thick just to avoid collapsing instantly. Even then, engineers test every seam and bolt obsessively, because a single flaw could mean the vehicle crumples in a fraction of a second, faster than a camera could even catch the moment happening. So how does anything alive survive that same crushing force with nothing but skin, muscle, and bone? The trick isn't fighting the pressure, it's accepting it. Human bodies struggle underwater because we carry air-filled spaces. Lungs, sinuses, the middle of our ears. Air compresses under pressure, and that compression is what crushes divers who go too deep too fast. But creatures built for the Mariana Trench evolved without those air pockets. Their bodies are made mostly of water and soft, flexible tissue, both of which barely compress at all no matter how much pressure surrounds them. Instead of resisting the crushing depth, these animals let the pressure pass straight through their bodies, like squeezing a water balloon instead of a soda can. The water balloon holds its shape. The soda can crumples instantly. This single evolutionary trick is the reason anything survives down here at all. But surviving the pressure is only step 1. The first creature ever caught on camera at this depth revealed something even stranger about how far evolution had to bend the rules of biology. A camera drops through the darkness, sinking toward the trench floor 6 miles beneath the waves. For hours nothing happens, just black water and drifting particles caught in the lights. Then something swims into frame, pale, almost see-through. with fins that ripple like silk instead of moving in stiff, jerky motions. It glides along the seafloor like it belongs there completely, like 6 miles of crushing ocean pressure means nothing to its body at all. This is the Mariana snailfish, and it holds the record for the deepest fish ever filmed alive on planet Earth. Snailfish don't look tough. They're small, soft-bodied, almost fragile-looking, more like a tadpole than a shark. No thick armour, no massive muscles. Nothing about their appearance screams survivor. Yet these fish thrive at depths that would instantly crush most other species on the planet. The secret sits inside their skulls. Most fish skulls are hard and rigid, built to protect the brain like a helmet. But scientists studying snailfish found something bizarre. Their skulls stay soft and slightly open, never fully hardening the way skull bones do in nearly every other fish species on Earth. At first, that sounds like a fatal weakness. A soft skull seems like an easy target, fragile and unprotected. But down in the Mariana Trench, that softness becomes the ultimate defense. Here's the biology. Rigid structures crack under pressure. Flexible structures bend instead, absorbing that same force without breaking apart. A soft skull can flex slightly as crushing pressure pushes in from every direction, distributing the force evenly instead of letting it concentrate on one weak point. It works almost like the suspension system in a car, letting the wheels absorb bumps in the road so the frame doesn't shatter. Snailfish also lack something else most fish depend on completely: a swim bladder. That's the gas-filled organ many fish use to control how they float in water. Gas compresses under pressure, which makes a swim bladder a liability at extreme depth. Exactly the kind of air pocket that gets crushed in the trench. Snailfish evolved without one entirely, relying instead on fat stored throughout their bodies to control buoyancy, since fat barely compresses no matter how much pressure surrounds it. Every part of this fish's body reads like a checklist for surviving the crushing environment of the deep ocean. Soft skull, no swim bladder, fat-based buoyancy, nothing rigid enough to shatter under pressure. When researchers filmed a Mariana snailfish at nearly 26,000 feet down, they didn't just capture the deepest fish ever recorded on camera. They captured proof that evolution can rebuild an entire body from scratch, swapping strength for flexibility, hardness for softness, until survival becomes possible in a place built to destroy anything solid. But a bendable skull explains how snailfish avoid getting crushed. It doesn't explain something even stranger. How do their cells keep functioning at all under pressure intense enough to break apart the basic building blocks of life itself? Picture 2 objects hitting the ground from a 5-story building. One is a glass bottle, the other is a rubber ball. The glass bottle shatters instantly, cracks spreading through every rigid inch of it. The rubber ball just bounces, bending on impact before springing right back into shape. That difference between shattering and bending explains exactly how the Mariana snailfish survives one of the harshest environments on planet Earth. Scientists first noticed something odd about snailfish skulls back when they began studying specimens pulled from extreme depths. Instead of the hard, fused bone structure found in most fish species, snailfish skulls stayed partially open, held together loosely by cartilage instead of solid bone. Cartilage is the same flexible material that shapes your ears and the tip of your nose, tough but bendable, nothing like rigid bone at all. At first glance, this looks like bad design. A gap in the skull seems like a dangerous weak point, something that should leave the brain exposed and vulnerable, but down at extreme ocean depths, that gap becomes the reason the fish survives instead of getting crushed. Here's what happens physically. When massive pressure surrounds a rigid object like a hard skull, the force has nowhere to go, so it builds up until something eventually cracks under the strain. But when that same pressure surrounds something flexible, like cartilage, the material simply bends and flexes along with the pressure instead of resisting it, spreading the crushing force evenly instead of letting it concentrate in one dangerous spot. Snailfish skulls essentially absorb pressure the exact same way a car's suspension system absorbs a pothole in the road. The wheel dips down, the shock absorber compresses, and the frame of the car above never feels the impact directly. Without that flexible system, every pothole would eventually crack the vehicle apart. The same principle protects the snailfish brain against pressure intense enough to instantly crush steel submarine hulls built inches thick. This bendable design goes far beyond the skull too. Researchers studying snailfish tissue found that nearly every part of their bodies favours flexibility over rigid strength. Their bones are thinner and less mineralized compared to related shallow water species. Their muscles contain more water and less dense tissue. Every structural choice trades hardness for the ability to bend without snapping. Compare this to a diver descending too quickly without proper training. Human bones stay rigid no matter how deep you go, which is exactly why extreme pressure change is so dangerous for people. Rigid bone doesn't flex to relieve pressure buildup. It just holds firm until something catastrophic eventually gives way. Snailfish rewrote that entire rulebook through millions of years of evolution, trading hardness for survival in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. But a flexible skeleton only solves half the problem facing life this deep. Bones and cartilage aren't the only structures pressure can destroy. Down at the cellular level, an entirely different battle rages inside every single cell of a snailfish's body. One fought not with bending bones, but with a tiny molecule scientists are only beginning to understand. 6 miles down, something the size of your fist drifts slowly across the ocean floor. It has no shell, no bones, no brain. It's a single cell, technically. Just one massive blob of living material floating through total darkness like a ghost. This is a giant amoeba, and finding one in the Mariana Trench broke another rule scientists thought they understood about life at extreme depth. Most amoebas are microscopic, so small you'd need a powerful microscope just to see one clearly. They exist as single cells almost everywhere on Earth, in soil, in ponds, even inside the human body. But the amoebas found drifting through the Mariana Trench are giants compared to their relatives anywhere else on the planet, some growing large enough to see without any equipment at all. Scientists call these giant deep-sea amoebas xenophiophories, and they represent one of the strangest survival stories in the entire ocean. Here's what makes them so bizarre. A xenophyophore is still just one single cell, the same basic building block that makes up every living thing on Earth. Your entire body contains trillions of cells working together. A xenophyophore is one cell, doing everything alone, yet somehow growing to a size that would be impossible for a single cell almost anywhere else on the planet. How does one cell survive being that large? The answer connects directly back to the crushing pressure surrounding it. Extreme pressure actually helps stabilize the delicate structures inside a cell that would otherwise collapse under their own weight in a lower pressure environment. The same force that would instantly crush a human body works almost like scaffolding for a xenophyophore, holding its unusual structure together instead of destroying it. These strange creatures also build elaborate shells around themselves using sediment from the ocean floor, cementing together mud, sand, and mineral particles into intricate structures that look almost architectural. Scientists studying trench sediment have found actual footprints left behind by their tracks, evidence that these giant single cells are actively feeding and moving across the ocean floor, not just sitting motionless in the mud. Xenophyophores feed by filtering tiny particles drifting down from far above, catching bacteria and organic debris that sinks slowly from the sunlit ocean thousands of feet overhead. In a place with no sunlight and no plants, that falling debris becomes the foundation of survival for everything living on the trench floor. Perhaps strangest of all, some xenophyophore shells discovered in deep ocean surveys appear to have remained undisturbed for decades, suggesting these creatures can survive for remarkably long stretches of time in an environment where food arrives rarely and sparingly. A single cell, larger than anything reasonable, thriving in crushing darkness by turning mud into architecture and drifting scraps into a decades-long survival strategy. But xenophyophores aren't collecting sediment purely for shelter. Deep inside that structure, an entirely different survival strategy plays out at a scale too small for any camera to capture directly. A shell usually means calcium, the same hard material found in seashells washed up on any beach. Xenophyophores never got that memo. Instead, they build their shells from something else entirely, the ocean floor itself. Deep in the Mariana Trench, these giant single-celled creatures gather grains of sand, flecks of mineral, and tiny particles of sediment drifting through the water. Then they cement those pieces together into a structure called a test, an intricate shell built entirely from the mud surrounding them. No two tests look identical. Some form branching patterns, others build flat disc-shaped structures that spread across the seafloor like strange underwater sculptures. Building a shell from scratch out of loose sediment sounds slow, and it is. Scientists studying xenophyphore growth rates believe these structures can take years, sometimes decades, to fully form. That's an extraordinary amount of time for a single cell, especially one living in a place where food arrives as nothing more than rare scraps falling from far above. So why bother building anything at all? The shell serves multiple purposes at once. It offers protection from the handful of predators that exist this deep. It provides structure in an environment with no solid surfaces to grow on besides the mud itself. But most importantly, the shell acts like a trap, a physical structure that increases the surface area available for catching drifting food particles as they slowly sink past. Here's where things get even stranger. Researchers studying xenophyphore tests have found them absolutely packed with heavy metals and radioactive elements at concentrations far higher than the surrounding mud. Nobody fully understands why these creatures concentrate certain elements inside their shells at such extreme levels, though some scientists believe it may help kill bacteria or protect against other microscopic threats drifting through the water. Whatever the reason, this strange chemistry has turned xenophyphores into unexpected tools for something completely unrelated to biology, nuclear testing history. Scientists have found radioactive particles inside these shells that trace directly back to nuclear weapons tests conducted decades ago on the ocean surface, thousands of feet above the trench floor. Fallout from those tests slowly drifted downward through the water column, eventually settling into trench sediment and getting absorbed directly into xenophyphore shells as they formed. That means some of these shells are essentially recording devices, preserving a chemical timeline of human nuclear activity from decades in the past, layered inside mud architecture built one grain at a time by a single cell with no brain and no nervous system. Survey footage from deep-sea expeditions has documented dense clusters of these shells scattered across trench walls and open sediment, sometimes numbering in the dozens within a single small patch of seafloor. In certain areas of the Mariana Trench, xenophyphores rank among the most numerous large organisms found anywhere on the bottom. A creature with no brain has built elaborate architecture, trapped decades of nuclear history inside its own body, and turned mud into one of the strangest survival records on the entire planet. But xenophyphores are far from the only organisms turning ocean chemistry into a survival advantage. Deeper inside individual cells throughout the trench, an entirely different chemical strategy keeps life functioning under pressure, intense enough to break apart the basic machinery inside every living thing. Every cell in your body is packed with proteins, tiny folded machines that keep you alive by carrying out thousands of jobs every single second. Crushing pressure destroys those machines. It literally forces proteins to unfold, bending their delicate structure until they stop working completely. This should make deep-sea survival impossible. Yet something inside snailfish cells fights back against this exact threat, using a strange molecule most people have never heard of. Scientists call it TMAO, short for a chemical compound found naturally inside the cells of deep-sea creatures. Think of TMAO like a bodyguard for proteins, a molecule that surrounds delicate protein structures and physically stops crushing pressure from bending them out of shape. Here's how the danger actually works. Proteins depend entirely on their folded shape to function correctly, similar to how a key only opens a lock if it's cut into the exact right shape. Extreme pressure pushes against these folded structures, gradually forcing them to bend and unfold, like squeezing a paperclip, until it loses its original form. Once a protein unfolds, it stops working, and a cell packed with broken proteins eventually stops functioning entirely. TMAO prevents that collapse by clustering tightly around protein structures, creating a kind of chemical cushion that resists the crushing outward force of extreme pressure. The deeper an animal lives, scientists discovered, the more TMAO tends to pack inside its cells, almost like the body is calibrating its own defense system based on exactly how much pressure it needs to survive. Shallow water fish carry barely a trace of this molecule, but snailfish captured from the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench contain some of the highest TMAO concentrations ever measured in a living animal, sometimes over 100 times higher than fish living near the ocean surface. This creates a very specific chemical signature, one so precise that scientists eventually used it to answer one of the biggest lingering questions in deep-sea biology. If TMAO increases predictably with depth, could researchers use that pattern to calculate exactly how deep fish could theoretically survive before pressure finally became too extreme for any amount of chemical protection to help. Calculating that answer meant crunching data from every known deep-sea fish species, tracking how TMAO levels climbed deeper and deeper into the ocean, then projecting that same trend forward toward the crushing pressure found at the absolute bottom of the trench. The number that came back would end up eerily precise, close enough to reality that it sent shockwaves through the deep sea science community and lined up almost perfectly with something filmed years later at the actual bottom of the ocean. But before revealing that number, one question remains. If pressure alone doesn't set the ultimate limit for fish survival, what actually stops life from spreading any deeper than this exact point in the trench? Numbers rarely feel dramatic, but one number calculated from TMAO research turned into one of the most accurate predictions in deep-sea science. Researchers studying TMAO concentrations across dozens of fish species noticed something consistent. The molecule increased steadily with depth, almost like clockwork, following a predictable mathematical pattern every single time. That consistency gave scientists an unusual opportunity. If TMAO levels climbed in a predictable pattern as depth increased, researchers could theoretically extend that same pattern forward, calculating the exact point where TMAO would need to reach dangerous concentrations just to protect a fish's proteins from collapsing under pressure. Push that molecule too far past its natural limit, and it stops protecting cells altogether. Instead, it starts disrupting the delicate balance of water inside every cell, actually pulling moisture out through a process called osmosis. Past a certain concentration, TMAO shifts from life-saving protection into a threat just as dangerous as the crushing pressure it was originally counteracting. Using this mathematical relationship, researchers calculated a specific depth where fish biology would theoretically hit its absolute limit, a point where TMAO could no longer protect proteins without simultaneously destroying the cell through water loss. Below this calculated threshold, no fish should physically be able to survive, no matter how much evolution optimized its biology. That calculated number landed at approximately 27,000 feet. For years, this remained a theoretical prediction, a number on a page rather than something confirmed in the crushing darkness of the actual ocean. Scientists wondered whether nature would actually respect this mathematical boundary, or whether some unknown adaptation might allow fish to push past it. Then, during a series of deep-sea expeditions using specialized cameras and bait traps, something remarkable happened. Researchers filmed a snailfish alive and swimming at a depth of 26,831 feet, astonishingly close to that calculated theoretical limit. That's the equivalent of accurately predicting a target from 93 million miles away, and missing by less than the width of a football field. This wasn't a lucky coincidence. It confirmed that TMAO truly does set the outer boundary for fish survival in the deep ocean, a chemical speed limit written directly into the biology of every deep-sea species. Past this depth, cameras have documented plenty of other life still surviving, invertebrates and amoebas and bacteria that don't rely on the same protein structures fish depend on. But fish themselves, an entire branch of life going back hundreds of millions of years, hit an invisible wall at almost exactly the depth math predicted they would. An equation on a piece of paper accurately predicted the exact edge of vertebrate life on planet Earth, confirmed only when a camera finally reached that depth and captured the proof swimming directly through frame. But if fish cannot survive past this boundary, something else must be filling that deeper darkness instead. The answer waiting below involves creatures with no bones and no delicate proteins to protect at all. Drop a dead fish into the Mariana Trench, and something finds it almost instantly. Not in days, not in hours exactly, in minutes. Scientists lowering bait traps into the trench have documented swarms of small shrimp-like creatures called amphipods, arriving at food almost immediately after it hits the ocean floor, appearing from total darkness like they were waiting the entire time. Amphipods look a little like tiny shrimp, usually just an inch or two long, with curved bodies and multiple pairs of legs built for scavenging. They're found throughout the world's oceans, from shallow tide pools to the deepest trenches on the planet. But the amphipods living in the Mariana Trench have adapted into something scientists consider genuinely extreme survivors. Unlike fish, amphipods don't rely on delicate folded proteins protected by TMAO. Their bodies are built differently, tougher and less vulnerable to the specific dangers that create a hard limit for fish deeper in the trench. This fundamental difference in biology explains why amphipods thrive at depths where fish simply cannot survive, filling the darkness below that 27,000-foot boundary with an entirely different survival strategy. Researchers studying amphipod behavior have discovered they possess an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting the chemical signature of decaying food from remarkable distances across the pitch-black sea floor. When a whale carcass or a dead fish sinks toward the bottom of the trench, amphipods somehow detect it and swarm toward the food source within a matter of hours, sometimes arriving in the thousands to strip a carcass down to bare bone. This scavenging behavior plays a critical role in the overall trench ecosystem. Without sunlight to fuel plant growth, nearly everything living in the Mariana Trench depends on food falling from the world above, scraps and carcasses sinking slowly from the sunlit ocean thousands of feet overhead. Amphipods act like the trench's cleanup crew, rapidly breaking down anything that arrives and recycling those nutrients back into the ecosystem. But amphipods reveal something else entirely once scientists look closer, something that has nothing to do with their impressive survival skills and everything to do with a problem humans created thousands of feet above their extreme habitat. When researchers began analysing the digestive systems of trench amphipods collected from multiple expeditions, they discovered something deeply troubling hidden inside creatures living in one of the most remote, untouched places on planet Earth. This finding would eventually force scientists to reconsider just how far human impact actually reaches, even into a place 6 miles removed from any coastline, any city, any trace of civilization. The trench's most efficient scavengers, it turns out, had been scavenging something no one expected to find that deep at all. The Mariana Trench sits roughly 200 miles from the nearest coastline, buried under 6 miles of open ocean. It should be one of the most untouched places on planet Earth, completely separated from human civilization by sheer distance and crushing depth alone. It isn't. When scientists began examining amphipods collected from deep inside the Mariana Trench, they expected to find evidence of natural scavenging, remnants of dead fish, or organic debris inside their digestive systems. Instead, researchers discovered something far more alarming hidden inside these tiny creatures. Microscopic fibers and fragments of plastic found inside the guts of amphipods living at some of the deepest points ever sampled on the planet. This wasn't a rare, isolated discovery either. Studies examining amphipods from multiple deep ocean trenches found plastic contamination in the vast majority of samples collected, with some studies reporting plastic present in every single amphipod tested from certain locations. These weren't large, visible pieces of trash. They were microplastics, tiny fragments smaller than a grain of rice, broken down from larger plastic waste that originated somewhere on the surface, likely hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Understanding how plastic travels that far down means understanding how the trench itself works as an ecosystem. Remember, nearly everything living at these depths depends on food falling from far above, organic debris slowly sinking down from the sunlit ocean thousands of feet overhead. That same sinking process that delivers life-sustaining nutrients to the trench floor also delivers something else entirely: humanity's waste, drifting downward right alongside natural food particles, eventually settling into the exact same dark corners where amphipods gather to scavenge. The Mariana Trench actually amplifies this problem rather than avoiding it. Because the trench functions like a funnel, its steep walls and narrow shape naturally concentrate everything sinking down from above into one relatively small area on the ocean floor. Water currents throughout the wider Pacific Ocean also tend to gather floating debris and slowly transport it toward deep trench systems over time, turning some of the most remote places on the planet into unexpected collection points for surface pollution. Perhaps most disturbing of all, explorers piloting submarines to the very deepest point of the Mariana Trench, the Challenger, deep itself, have documented actual plastic waste resting directly on the ocean floor, including a plastic bag spotted during one historic dive to the absolute bottom of the planet's deepest place. Scientists studying this contamination worry about consequences reaching far beyond the trench itself. Amphipods sit near the base of the trench food web, meaning any toxic chemicals absorbed from plastic could work their way upward through predator and prey relationships, potentially affecting other deep-sea creatures that feed on amphipods as their primary food source. The most isolated ecosystem on planet Earth, buried under 6 miles of crushing ocean pressure and total darkness, has still been reached by pollution, originating from human activity taking place thousands of feet above and sometimes thousands of miles away. But plastic isn't the only human trace scientists have discovered hidden inside the bodies of trench amphipods. A second, far older form of contamination has also made its way into this deep, isolated ecosystem, one connected to a chapter of human history that unfolded decades before plastic pollution ever became a global concern. Decades before plastic pollution became a global concern, humans conducted something else entirely on the ocean's surface: nuclear weapons testing. Throughout the mid-20th century, multiple nations detonated nuclear bombs both above and below the ocean surface, particularly across the Pacific, releasing radioactive particles that spread through the atmosphere and settled into ocean water across the entire region. Most people assume that contamination stayed relatively contained, dispersing and fading over the decades that followed those tests. Scientists studying deep-sea amphipods from the Mariana Trench discovered a very different story. When researchers analysed the tissue of amphipods collected from extreme trench depths, they found detectable traces of radioactive carbon, a specific chemical signature directly linked to nuclear weapons testing conducted decades earlier. This particular form of radioactive carbon barely existed in the environment before nuclear testing began, meaning any of it appearing inside trench amphipods had to originate from human nuclear activity conducted on the surface. The concentration levels researchers discovered were genuinely surprising. Radioactive carbon levels found inside trench amphipods matched or even exceeded levels found in surface ocean creatures, despite the amphipods living 6 miles below the location where nuclear testing actually took place decades earlier. Understanding why requires returning to that same sinking food chain that delivers both nutrients and plastic pollution to the trench floor. Radioactive particles released during nuclear testing didn't simply vanish after settling into ocean water. Instead, they worked their way into the tissue of surface organisms first, tiny plankton and algae, absorbing radioactive carbon directly from contaminated seawater as they grew. From there, the contamination followed the same pathway as everything else in the ocean's food chain. Small organisms containing radioactive carbon eventually died and sank, or became food for larger creatures that later produced waste containing that same chemical signature. Over time, this radioactive material drifted downward through the water column, exactly like any other organic debris, eventually reaching the trench floor and entering the diet of amphipods scavenging across the bottom. This discovery revealed something scientists hadn't fully appreciated before. The Mariana Trench doesn't just receive food and pollution from the surface world above, it also receives a chemical timestamp, a preserved record of human nuclear activity, carried downward through 6 miles of ocean water and locked directly into the tissue of creatures living in one of the most remote environments on the entire planet. Researchers now use this radioactive signature as an unexpected tool, actually helping scientists calculate how quickly organic material travels from the ocean surface down to extreme trench depths. By measuring how radioactive carbon levels changed within trench organisms over specific time periods, scientists gain new insight into exactly how fast the trench's entire food chain operates, information that would have been extremely difficult to calculate through any other scientific method. Nuclear fallout dropped from the sky decades ago and absorbed into ocean water thousands of feet above now sits preserved inside the bodies of tiny scavengers crawling across the deepest, most isolated point on planet Earth. But contamination and fallout only tell part of the story unfolding on the trench floor. Beneath the amphipods and their radioactive secrets, an entirely different form of life thrives using no sunlight and no falling food at all, building an ecosystem from chemistry alone. Every food chain you've ever learned about starts the same way, with sunlight. Plants use sunlight to grow, animals eat plants, bigger animals eat those animals. Remove sunlight from that equation, and the entire system should collapse into nothing. Yet scattered across sections of the Mariana Trench, colonies of bacteria thrive in complete darkness, building an entire ecosystem from a food source that has absolutely nothing to do with the sun. These bacteria feed on chemicals instead of light, specifically methane and sulfur compounds seeping directly out of cracks in the trench walls through a process called chemosynthesis. These microorganisms convert those raw chemicals directly into usable energy, essentially building the same kind of life-sustaining fuel that plants create through photosynthesis, except using chemistry pulled from solid rock instead of light pulled from the sky. Scientists first discovered chemosynthesis happening near deep-sea hydrothermal vents decades ago, and that discovery completely reshaped our understanding of what life actually requires to survive. Before this discovery, sunlight seemed like a universal requirement, something every ecosystem needed somewhere in its foundation. Chemosynthetic bacteria proved that assumption wrong, revealing an entirely separate blueprint for how life could sustain itself, using nothing but chemical reactions occurring in complete darkness. Inside the Mariana Trench specifically, researchers have identified thriving bacterial mats clustered around methane seeps, areas where gas escapes slowly through cracks in the seafloor. These bacterial colonies coat the surrounding rock in thick, visible layers, sometimes stretching across large sections of the trench wall, forming dense colonies visible even through the limited lighting of a deep-sea camera. This chemical food source creates something remarkable, an entire miniature ecosystem completely disconnected from the sinking debris and falling scraps that sustain most other life throughout the trench. While amphipods and xenophyophores depend heavily on nutrients drifting downward from the sunlit ocean far above, chemosynthetic bacteria don't need any of that. They generate their own energy directly from chemicals seeping out of the Earth itself, completely independent from anything happening on the surface world thousands of feet overhead. This independence carries enormous scientific significance far beyond simply explaining bacterial survival in the trench. If life can build a complete, self-sustaining ecosystem without any sunlight whatsoever, relying purely on chemical energy instead, that same basic principle could theoretically apply to environments far beyond planet Earth entirely. Scientists studying chemosynthesis increasingly look toward icy moons throughout our solar system, distant worlds like Europa and Enceladus that contain vast oceans of liquid water sealed beneath thick shells of ice, completely cut off from any sunlight whatsoever. If chemosynthetic bacteria can build a thriving ecosystem in the permanent darkness of the Mariana Trench, similar chemical processes might theoretically support life in those distant sunless oceans as well, entirely separate from Earth. A food chain built from methane and sulfur instead of sunlight, thriving 6 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean, has quietly become one of science's strongest pieces of evidence that life might exist far beyond our own planet entirely. But bacteria surviving on raw chemicals represents just the beginning of this sunless ecosystem. Built directly on top of these bacterial colonies, something even stranger has evolved, a creature that abandoned one of the most basic body parts any animal needs to survive. Every animal you've ever seen needs a mouth. It's one of the most basic requirements for survival across the entire animal kingdom. Tube worms living near Hadal vents in the Mariana Trench broke that rule entirely. They have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system whatsoever, and somehow they're thriving. These strange creatures anchor themselves near chemical seeps and vent systems scattered across the trench floor, growing inside long, protective tubes that can stretch several feet in length. From a distance, they almost resemble pale, flexible pipes rising up from cracks in the seafloor, swaying gently whenever water currents pass by. Without a mouth or stomach, tube worms face an obvious problem. How does anything eat without the basic equipment every other animal relies on for feeding? The answer lives directly inside their bodies. Tube worms host massive colonies of chemosynthetic bacteria, the exact same type of bacteria thriving on methane and sulfur throughout the surrounding trench environment. Instead of competing with these bacteria for food, tube worms evolved an entirely different strategy, forming a direct partnership, housing trillions of bacteria inside a specialized internal organ that essentially functions as a living food factory. Here's how this bizarre arrangement actually works. Tube worms absorb chemicals like hydrogen sulfide directly through specialized structures near their exposed tips, then transport those chemicals internally to the bacteria living inside their bodies. The bacteria use those raw chemicals to produce energy through chemosynthesis, converting simple compounds into nutrients the tube worm needs to survive. In exchange, the The tube worm provides its bacterial partners with a safe, protected home, along with a steady, reliable supply of the exact chemicals they need to keep producing food. This relationship represents one of the closest partnerships found anywhere in the animal kingdom. Two completely different organisms merged together so tightly that neither one could realistically survive without the other. The tube worm essentially evolved into a living life support system for the bacteria housed inside it, while those same bacteria evolved into the tube worm's entire food source, eliminating any need for a traditional digestive system altogether. Scientists studying this relationship describe it as one of evolution's most extreme examples of specialization, a body plan stripped down to almost nothing except the exact structures needed to support this unusual bacterial partnership. Over countless generations, natural selection gradually eliminated any body part tube worms no longer needed, including an entire digestive system most other animals consider absolutely essential for survival. This extreme adaptation reveals something profound about evolution's flexibility when survival depends on it. Given enough time and enough pressure to adapt, life can restructure itself in ways that seem almost impossible, abandoning body parts most creatures consider non-negotiable, so long as some alternative solution successfully fills that exact same need. A creature with no mouth, no stomach, and no traditional way of eating anything at all has still found a way to thrive in one of the most extreme, isolated environments found anywhere on planet Earth. But tube worms represent just one part of a much larger, stranger ecosystem building up around the trench's chemical vents. Nearby, an entirely different extreme awaits, one where boiling water and freezing cold exist within mere feet of each other. Most of the Mariana Trench sits at a temperature barely above freezing, somewhere close to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to numb human skin within minutes. But scattered across certain sections of the trench floor, something impossible happens. Water blasts out of the seafloor hot enough to cook an egg, sometimes exceeding temperatures found inside a kitchen oven. These are hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor where seawater seeps down into the Earth's crust, gets superheated by magma below, then blasts back out under enormous pressure, carrying dissolved minerals and chemicals along with it. Some of these vents release water exceeding 600 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to instantly kill nearly any living creature that touched it directly. Here's what makes this genuinely bizarre. That 600-degree water doesn't stay hot for long. Within just a few feet of leaving the vent, it mixes rapidly with the surrounding freezing ocean water, plunging back down toward that same numbing 34-degree baseline almost instantly. This creates an extreme temperature gradient unlike almost anything else found in nature. Boiling water and near freezing water existing within the same small stretch of ocean floor, separated by nothing more than a few feet of open water. Somehow, an entire ecosystem thrives directly within this narrow, brutal temperature zone. Certain species of tube worms, shrimp, and specialized bacteria have adapted to survive positioned extremely close to these vents, tolerating temperature swings that would instantly kill almost any other creature on the planet. Some heat-tolerant bacteria discovered near hydrothermal vents can survive water temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Fahrenheit, among the highest heat tolerance ever documented in any living organism on Earth. Scientists studying these vent ecosystems have discovered something particularly strange about the shrimp species clustering closest to the superheated water. Unlike typical shrimp, which rely heavily on eyesight to navigate and hunt, certain vent shrimp evolved specialized light-sensing organs positioned across their backs instead of traditional eyes. Researchers believe these organs might detect extremely faint traces of heat radiation glowing directly from the vents themselves, a type of sensory perception almost unheard of anywhere else in the animal kingdom. Why would any creature choose to live so close to something capable of instantly boiling it alive? The answer connects directly back to chemosynthesis. Hydrothermal vents release enormous concentrations of chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, exactly the fuel source chemosynthetic bacteria need to generate energy. Living close to a vent means living close to an abundant, reliable food supply, even though that same proximity carries genuine lethal risk if any creature drifts even slightly too close to the superheated water itself. This delicate balancing act, staying near enough to the vent to feed but far enough away to avoid being cooked alive, defines survival for every single organism living within these vent communities. Hydrothermal vents like these don't just support strange trench ecosystems either. Scientists studying the earliest origins of life on planet Earth increasingly believe environments similar to these ancient vent systems might be exactly where life itself first began billions of years ago, long before oceans ever filled with the complex creatures found throughout the world today. Boiling water and freezing cold, chemical energy and extreme adaptation, all crammed into the same small stretch of ocean floor. But these vent ecosystems represent just one piece of a much larger delivery system feeding the entire trench, a process that begins thousands of feet above, far from any volcanic heat source at all. Picture dropping a marble into a wide bowl. Instead of scattering randomly, it rolls toward the center, collecting exactly where the bowl curves inward the most. The Mariana Trench works almost exactly the same way, except instead of a marble, it collects nearly everything that sinks through the entire water column above it. This funnel effect happens because of the trench's unique shape. Steep walls drop dramatically on either side, creating a narrow channel that naturally guides sinking material toward the deepest point at the bottom. Combined with ocean currents throughout the surrounding Pacific that tend to push floating and sinking debris toward deep trench systems over time, the Mariana Trench essentially acts like a massive collection point for anything drifting downward from thousands of feet above. Scientists call this process marine snow, and it's constantly falling throughout the entire ocean, day and night, every single day of the year. Marine snow consists of tiny organic particles, dead plankton, waste material, bits of decaying algae, and other microscopic debris slowly drifting downward from the sunlit ocean near the surface. Individually, these particles are nearly invisible, but collectively they form a constant gentle snowfall of organic material raining down through the entire water column, all the way to the trench floor 6 miles below. For most of the open ocean, marine snow disperses relatively evenly across a wide area, but the trench's steep, narrow shape concentrates this falling material far more intensely than flat sections of ocean floor elsewhere, creating unusually rich deposits of organic debris precisely where the trench's unique geography channels everything together. This concentrated food supply explains something that initially confused scientists studying deep-sea ecosystems. Despite existing in one of the most extreme, hostile environments on the planet, certain sections of the Mariana Trench actually support surprisingly dense populations of life compared to other deep ocean areas at similar depths. The trench isn't just surviving despite its harsh conditions. In certain spots, it's thriving specifically because its unique shape concentrates food more efficiently than flatter regions of ocean floor. Researchers have confirmed this funnel effect directly by comparing sediment samples collected from inside the trench against samples gathered from equally deep, flatter sections of ocean floor located elsewhere. Trench sediment consistently contains significantly higher concentrations of organic material, direct physical evidence that the trench's shape genuinely does concentrate falling debris more effectively than open, flat sea floor found in other deep ocean regions. This constant supply of marine snow becomes the foundation almost every creature in the trench depends on somehow, whether directly, like amphipods scavenging debris straight off the seafloor, or indirectly, like predators feeding on those same scavengers further up the food chain. But marine snow alone doesn't explain everything happening on the trench floor. Occasionally something far larger than tiny drifting particles makes the same 6-mile journey downward, delivering an amount of food so massive it can sustain entire communities of trench life for decades at a time. A whale can weigh as much as 40,000 pounds, roughly the same as 10 African elephants standing together. When a whale dies far out in the open ocean, that massive body eventually sinks, beginning a slow 6-mile descent toward the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Scientists call this event a whale fall, and it ranks among the most significant food deliveries the deep trench ecosystem ever receives. The journey down takes time, often several days depending on ocean currents and depth. But once that massive body finally settles onto the trench floor, it triggers an explosion of activity unlike almost anything else observed in this dark, food-scarce environment. Scavengers arrive almost immediately, drawn by chemical signals drifting through the water, the same scent-detecting systems amphipods use to locate smaller food sources scattered across the seafloor. Researchers studying whale falls have documented a fairly predictable pattern unfolding over time, occurring in distinct stages as different creatures move in to take advantage of this massive food source. During the earlier stage, mobile scavengers like amphipods and other crustaceans swarm the carcass aggressively, stripping away soft tissue at a remarkably fast pace. A single whale carcass can attract thousands of individual scavengers within just the first few days, reducing a massive body down to bare bones surprisingly quickly. Once the soft tissue disappears, a second stage begins, one that unfolds much more slowly over an extended period of time. Specialized worms and smaller organisms move in to colonize the leftover bones themselves, feeding on fats and oils trapped deep within the skeletal structure. Certain species of worms discovered on whale skeletons possess no mouth or stomach at all, relying instead on bacteria housed inside root-like structures that dissolve directly into the bone to extract every last usable nutrient. This bone-consuming stage can stretch on remarkably long, with scientists estimating that a single whale skeleton might continue supporting a dedicated community of specialized organisms for up to 25 years after the whale's initial death. That means one whale, dying just once far above in the sunlit ocean, can continue feeding an entire dedicated ecosystem on the trench floor for decades afterward, long after every other visible trace of marine snow from that same time period has completely disappeared. Whale falls matter for reasons extending far beyond simply feeding scavengers too. Scientists believe these massive, long-lasting food sources may function almost like stepping stones scattered across the deep ocean floor, allowing certain specialized species to survive and spread across vast underwater distances that would otherwise contain far too little food to support permanent populations. Without whale falls periodically appearing across the deep ocean, some scientists believe entire specialized species dependent on this dramatic, extended food source might struggle to survive at all, unable to bridge the enormous, largely empty distances separating one whale fall from the next, scattered somewhere else entirely across the ocean floor. A single death occurring near the sunlit surface can end up sustaining an entire hidden community for 25 years straight, 6 miles below, in complete darkness most of the ocean's other creatures will never even reach. The Milky Way galaxy contains somewhere around 100 billion stars, an amount so massive it's nearly impossible for any human brain to picture accurately. Now picture something even harder to imagine. A single scoop of mud from the bottom of the Mariana Trench contains more living organisms than that entire galaxy contains stars. This isn't an exaggeration or a rounding error. Scientists studying trench sediment have discovered that microbes exist in staggering concentrations across the ocean floor, packed into mud at numbers that dwarf almost any other measurement found in nature. A single gram of trench sediment, an amount smaller than a sugar packet, can contain hundreds of millions of individual bacterial cells, sometimes even more depending on the exact location sampled. Multiply that concentration across the entire floor of the Mariana Trench, spanning hundreds of miles in length, and the total number of microbes living down here reaches numbers difficult to even express, using words most people understand. This discovery genuinely surprised scientists who once assumed extreme depth and crushing pressure would naturally limit how much life could survive on the trench floor. Instead, researchers found the opposite happening. Certain sections of the trench actually support higher concentrations of microbial life compared to flatter, shallower sections of ocean floor located elsewhere in the Pacific. Why would crushing pressure and total darkness create ideal conditions for microscopic life, instead of destroying it entirely? Part of the answer connects directly back to that funnel effect concentrating marine snow onto the narrow trench floor. More falling organic material means more available food for microbes capable of breaking down that debris into usable energy. But pressure itself may play an even stranger role. Certain microbes discovered specifically in trench environments show a genuine preference for extreme pressure, thriving more successfully in crushing depths than they would anywhere closer to the surface. Scientists call these organisms piezophiles, a name that essentially means pressure-loving. and they represent some of the most extreme survivors found anywhere on the entire planet. Piezophils have evolved cellular structures specifically optimized to function under intense pressure, sometimes struggling or dying entirely if brought up toward the surface where pressure drops dramatically. Their entire biology depends on the crushing conditions found only in the deepest parts of the ocean, making them genuinely incapable of surviving anywhere else on Earth. This staggering microbial population isn't just a fascinating statistic either. These trench microbes form the true foundation of the entire Hadal ecosystem, breaking down organic material into simpler nutrients that other trench organisms depend on throughout the entire food chain. From amphipods scavenging along the seafloor all the way up to snailfish swimming through crushing darkness far above the mud itself. An entire invisible galaxy, more numerous than every star in the Milky Way combined, exists silently within the mud beneath your feet if you ever somehow stood at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. But numbers alone don't capture everything strange happening within trench sediment. Some of these microscopic organisms have developed a survival strategy involving something even stranger than simply existing in massive numbers: the ability to stop existing almost entirely for thousands of years at a time. Imagine falling asleep and waking up thousands of years later, completely unaware that any time had passed at all. For certain microbes living deep within Mariana Trench sediment, something remarkably similar actually happens, stretched across timescales that seem almost impossible for anything alive to survive. Scientists studying deep sediment cores pulled from the trench floor have discovered dormant microbial communities buried far beneath the immediate surface layer, sometimes located many feet deep within compacted mud that settled into place thousands of years earlier. These microbes aren't dead, they're simply paused, existing in an extreme survival state where nearly all biological activity slows down to levels barely detectable using standard scientific instruments. This dormant state allows microbes to survive extended periods where food simply isn't available, conserving whatever limited energy remains inside their cells rather than burning through it attempting to remain fully active. Instead of dying when conditions turn unfavourable, these organisms essentially power down, waiting patiently until nutrients eventually become available again, however long that wait might actually take. Researchers studying these dormant microbial communities have found evidence suggesting some individual cells may have remained in this suspended state for remarkably long stretches, based on sediment layer dating and extremely limited signs of any biological activity occurring during that entire time. When scientists eventually introduce nutrients into laboratory samples containing these dormant microbes, some cells gradually reactivate, resuming normal biological functions almost as though no time had passed since they first entered dormancy. This ability raises fascinating questions extending far beyond simply understanding trench biology. If microbes can genuinely survive in a dormant state for such extraordinarily long periods, what does that reveal about the actual boundaries separating life from non-life? Most definitions of life include some form of ongoing activity or metabolism. Yet these dormant trench microbes seem to exist somewhere in between, neither clearly alive in any traditional active sense, nor genuinely dead in any permanent sense either. Scientists studying this phenomenon believe understanding dormancy might eventually prove useful far beyond the Mariana Trench itself. Similar dormant survival strategies could theoretically help explain how life might persist through extreme, prolonged periods of hardship on other planets or moons throughout the solar system, potentially surviving for enormous stretches of time while waiting for conditions to eventually become more favourable again. This dormant strategy also reveals something important about the trench environment overall. Food arrives unpredictably, dependent entirely on marine snow drifting down from far above or the occasional whale fall delivering a massive temporary feast. Microbes capable of essentially pausing their existence during lean periods, then reactivating instantly once food eventually becomes available again, hold a significant survival advantage over organisms locked into constant, continuous activity, regardless of whether food actually exists nearby. Thousands of years spent essentially paused, waiting silently within crushing mud for a meal that might not arrive for generations, represents one of the strangest survival strategies documented anywhere within the entire animal and microbial kingdoms combined. But dormant microbes waiting patiently in mud represent just one strange discovery buried within trench sediment. At the very bottom of the entire Mariana Trench, explorers eventually found something else resting directly on the ocean floor, an object that had absolutely no business existing at the deepest point on planet Earth. Nearly 7 miles beneath the ocean surface sits the Challenger Deep, the single deepest point found anywhere on the entire planet. Only a small handful of human beings have ever actually travelled there, a group smaller than the number of people who've walked on the surface of the Moon. The first successful journey to the Challenger Deep happened back in 1960, when 2 explorers piloted a specialised submarine called the Trieste, down through nearly 7 miles of crushing ocean water. The journey down alone took almost 5 hours, descending slowly through total darkness, while pressure built relentlessly against the submarine's reinforced steel hull. When the Trieste finally settled onto the ocean floor, the crew looked out through a small viewing window and witnessed something scientists insisted couldn't possibly exist at that depth: a flatfish, gliding calmly along the seafloor, seemingly unaffected by pressure, intense enough to instantly crush the submarine itself if its hull ever failed even slightly. For decades afterward, that single sighting remained humanity's only direct glimpse of life existing at the absolute deepest point on Earth. No other manned expedition successfully reached the Challenger Deep again until nearly 50 years later, largely due to the immense engineering challenges involved in building a vehicle capable of surviving that level of crushing pressure reliably. That changed dramatically in 2012, when filmmaker and explorer James Cameron piloted a specially designed submarine called the Deep Sea Challenger down to the Challenger Deep completely alone, becoming the first person in history to complete a solo dive to the deepest point on the entire planet. Cameron's submarine descended through nearly 7 miles of crushing darkness over the course of roughly 2.5 hours, considerably faster than the original 1960 expedition. Once he reached the bottom, Cameron spent several hours exploring and documenting the trench floor, collecting samples and capturing footage that would eventually reveal far more detail about Hadal ecosystems than scientists had ever previously observed directly. Since Cameron's historic solo dive, only a small number of additional expeditions have successfully reached the Challenger Deep, each one contributing valuable new observations about an environment still largely mysterious to modern science. Even today, more people have travelled into outer space than have ever visited the deepest point on planet Earth. This extreme rarity exists specifically because of the engineering challenges involved. Building a vehicle capable of reliably withstanding pressure exceeding 16,000 pounds per square inch requires incredibly precise engineering, where even a tiny structural flaw could result in catastrophic, instant failure. Every successful expedition to the Challenger Deep represents years of careful planning and engineering, all compressed into just a few short hours spent actually exploring the ocean floor itself. Despite decades of technological advancement since that first expedition in 1960, the deepest point on planet Earth remains one of the least explored, least understood environments found anywhere on the entire globe, visited by fewer humans than almost anywhere else conceivable. But during one of these rare, historic expeditions down to the absolute bottom of the world, explorers discovered something resting on the ocean floor that had absolutely no business existing at the deepest point on planet Earth. 7 miles beneath the ocean surface, at the absolute deepest point found anywhere on planet Earth, explorers expected to find extreme, alien-looking creatures perfectly adapted to crushing pressure and total darkness. Instead, one historic dive to the Challenger Deep captured footage of something disturbingly familiar: a plastic bag, resting directly on the seafloor at the deepest point human explorers have ever successfully documented. This discovery happened during one of the rare manned expeditions that successfully reached the absolute bottom of the Mariana Trench, part of a broader survey effort cataloguing debris found throughout different depths of the world's oceans. Researchers analysing footage and samples collected from thousands of individual deep-sea dives conducted across multiple decades found that plastic represented the most commonly documented type of debris, observed at extreme ocean depths, appearing far more frequently than researchers initially expected. Finding a plastic bag specifically at the Challenger Deep carries significant symbolic weight beyond simply representing one piece of litter. This single object travelled nearly 7 miles straight down, past the sunlit surface waters, through the pitch-black midnight zone, past chemosynthetic bacterial colonies and specialised snailfish, finally settling directly onto the single most remote, difficult-to-reach location found anywhere on the entire planet. Scientists studying deep ocean pollution believe plastic bags and similar lightweight debris likely reach extreme depths through a combination of factors working together. Ocean currents gradually transport floating plastic waste across vast distances, sometimes carrying debris thousands of miles from wherever it originally entered the water. Eventually, once plastic becomes waterlogged or sufficiently weighted down by marine growth accumulating on its surface, it begins sinking, potentially settling anywhere throughout the water column, including the absolute deepest points found in trench systems. This particular discovery forced many scientists studying ocean pollution to fundamentally reconsider assumptions about where human waste can realistically travel and accumulate. Before documented evidence like this existed, some researchers assumed extreme depth and distance from populated coastlines might naturally protect certain isolated deep-sea locations from significant plastic contamination. This single piece of footage helped demonstrate conclusively that no ocean location remains genuinely beyond humanity's environmental reach, regardless of how remote or physically inaccessible that location might initially seem. Researchers have since documented additional plastic debris scattered at various points throughout the Mariana Trench and other deep ocean trenches worldwide, ranging from food wrappers and beverage containers to larger fragments of fishing equipment and other manufactured materials. Combined with the microplastic contamination already discovered inside trench amphipods, this evidence paints an increasingly clear picture. Pollution originating from human activity has genuinely reached every corner of planet Earth's oceans, including locations most people would never even imagine humans could realistically impact. A plastic bag, resting silently at the deepest point on Earth, has become one of the most powerful symbols scientists use when explaining how far human environmental impact actually extends, 6 miles beyond where most people ever imagined their daily choices could possibly reach. But plastic and radioactive fallout aren't the only forces connecting the deep trench directly back to events unfolding on the surface world above. The trench itself sits at the boundary of something capable of producing consequences, reaching far beyond pollution alone. The Mariana Trench isn't just deep, it marks the exact boundary where 2 massive slabs of the Earth's crust collide directly against each other. This collision, happening in extreme slow motion across millions of years, makes the trench one of the most seismically active regions found anywhere on the entire planet. Scientists call this type of collision a subduction zone, a location where one tectonic plate gradually slides underneath a neighbouring plate, diving down into the deeper layers of the Earth like a ramp built from solid, moving rock. The Pacific plate slides directly beneath the smaller Mariana plate at this exact location, creating tremendous stress and pressure that builds up gradually along the boundary separating these 2 massive geological structures. This ongoing collision doesn't happen smoothly or continuously. Instead, tremendous pressure builds up slowly over extended periods of time as the 2 plates grind against each other, occasionally releasing that built-up stress suddenly and violently in the form of powerful earthquakes. Subduction zones, like the one forming the Mariana Trench, rank among the most reliable sources of major earthquake activity found anywhere throughout the entire Pacific Ocean region. Understanding why these earthquakes happen requires picturing the collision itself more clearly. As the Pacific plate slowly dives underneath its neighbouring plate, friction between the 2 massive rock formations prevents smooth, continuous movement. Instead, sections of both plates essentially lock together temporarily, building up enormous stored energy similar to compressing a massive spring, until that stress eventually overcomes the friction holding everything in place and releases suddenly all at once. When that release finally happens, the resulting earthquake can generate seismic waves powerful enough to be detected by monitoring equipment located on the opposite side of the entire planet. Subduction zone earthquakes specifically rank among the most powerful earthquakes documented anywhere throughout recorded human history, capable of releasing an amount of energy that dwarfs nearly every other type of natural disaster found on Earth. But earthquakes originating from subduction zones like the Mariana Trench carry an additional danger extending far beyond simply shaking the ground itself. When a powerful earthquake occurs directly along the ocean floor, it can suddenly displace an enormous volume of seawater sitting directly above the rupture, generating massive waves capable of travelling thousands of miles across the open ocean at speeds rivaling a commercial airplane. These waves, known as tsunamis, can strike coastlines located extraordinarily far from wherever the original earthquake actually occurred, sometimes causing catastrophic damage and loss of life in locations that experience no noticeable earthquake activity whatsoever, separated from the actual seismic event by thousands of miles of open ocean. This connection means the Mariana Trench, despite sitting isolated and remote 6 miles beneath the ocean surface, remains directly linked to natural disasters capable of affecting coastlines and communities scattered throughout the entire Pacific region, demonstrating how geological forces originating in the planet's most extreme depths can still generate consequences reaching populated areas thousands of miles removed from the trench itself. Scientists continuously monitor seismic activity throughout the Mariana Trench and similar subduction zones scattered across the Pacific, hoping to better understand and eventually predict when the next major release of built-up tectonic stress might actually occur. But earthquakes and tsunamis represent just one consequence stemming from the incredible geological forces responsible for actually creating the Mariana Trench in the first place. Understanding how these forces built the trench itself reveals an equally dramatic story unfolding across millions of years of Earth's deep geological history. Mount Everest stands roughly 29,000 feet tall, the highest point found anywhere on the entire surface of planet Earth. The Mariana Trench drops even deeper than that same mountain stands tall. If you somehow dropped Mount Everest directly into the trench's deepest point, the entire mountain would disappear beneath the surface, with over a mile of open water still remaining above its submerged peak. Building a hole deep enough to completely swallow the tallest mountain on Earth took an almost unimaginable amount of geological time and force. The process began millions of years ago, when 2 massive tectonic plates making up sections of the Earth's crust gradually drifted toward each other across the floor of the Pacific Ocean. These plates, essentially enormous slabs of solid rock, floating slowly across a layer of softer material deep within the Earth, move at speeds barely perceptible to any human observer, often just a few inches every single year. When the Pacific Plate eventually collided with the smaller Mariana Plate, something had to give. Because the Pacific Plate happened to be older and denser than its neighbouring plate, it began sliding underneath the Mariana Plate rather than colliding head-on, gradually diving downward into the deeper layers of the Earth in a process scientists call subduction. This diving motion created the trench itself, carving out an increasingly deep gash directly along the boundary, where the 2 plates continued grinding against each other. Unlike a canyon formed through water erosion happening at the surface, the Mariana Trench formed entirely through this slow, continuous collision between 2 massive geological structures pressing directly against each other for millions of consecutive years. As the Pacific Plate continued diving deeper beneath its neighbour, the trench gradually deepened right alongside it, growing incrementally more extreme with each passing century. This process hasn't actually stopped either. The Pacific Plate continues sliding beneath the Mariana Plate right now, at this exact moment, meaning the trench itself continues evolving gradually over time, even though those changes happen far too slowly for any human being to ever notice directly within a single lifetime. The extreme depth achieved by this particular subduction zone stems from several specific geological factors working together simultaneously. The Pacific Plate ranks among the oldest sections of oceanic crust found anywhere on the planet. An older oceanic crust tends to be significantly denser and colder compared to younger sections, causing it to sink more steeply and dramatically once subduction actually begins. This steep angle allows the Pacific Plate to dive unusually deep beneath its neighbour, creating a trench considerably deeper than many other subduction zones, found scattered throughout different regions of the world. Scientists studying the Mariana Trench believe this same subduction process will likely continue for millions of additional years into the future, meaning the trench itself may continue growing gradually deeper over time, incrementally exceeding even its current status as the deepest known point found anywhere across the entire planet. A hole deep enough to swallow the tallest mountain on Earth twice over, still actively growing today through forces too slow for any human to directly witness, represents one of the most extreme examples of geological transformation found anywhere throughout our planet's entire 4.5 billion year history. But understanding how the trench formed only explains half of what makes this location so genuinely remarkable. Exploring these extreme depths directly required humans to develop technology capable of succeeding where the human body itself could never possibly survive. A human body dropped into the crushing pressure found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench wouldn't simply struggle. It would be destroyed almost instantly, far too quickly for any pain signal to even reach the brain. Exploring this extreme environment directly meant humans needed to build something entirely different. Specialized machines engineered specifically to survive conditions the human body could never realistically withstand alone. Modern deep-sea exploration relies heavily on remotely operated vehicles, specialized robotic submarines controlled remotely from a surface ship, rather than carrying any human crew directly into the crushing depths themselves. These vehicles, commonly called ROVs, feature incredibly reinforced hulls constructed from materials specifically selected for their ability to withstand extreme pressure without buckling or failing catastrophically. Building a vehicle capable of reliably surviving pressure exceeding 16,000 pounds per square inch requires remarkably precise engineering throughout every single component. Even a microscopic flaw hidden somewhere within a vehicle's hull could potentially create a weak point where crushing pressure eventually concentrates, leading to sudden, catastrophic failure without any meaningful warning beforehand. Engineers designing these deep-sea vehicles often study biological adaptations found in creatures like the Mariana snailfish for inspiration, incorporating similar structural principles into vehicle design wherever practically possible. Just as flexible cartilage allows a snailfish skull to bend rather than shatter under crushing pressure, certain vehicle components incorporate materials specifically selected for their ability to flex slightly under pressure instead of remaining completely rigid, distributing crushing force more evenly across the entire structure. Beyond simply surviving the pressure itself, these specialized vehicles require sophisticated lighting and camera systems capable of functioning reliably in complete darkness, along with mechanical sampling arms designed to collect sediment, biological specimens, and water samples directly from the trench floor without requiring any direct human contact whatsoever. Communication represents another significant engineering challenge unique to extreme deep-sea exploration. Radio signals, which travel easily through air, struggle significantly when attempting to penetrate through miles of dense seawater. Instead, most deep-sea vehicles rely on physical tethers connecting directly back to a surface ship, or specialized acoustic signals capable of transmitting limited data through water using sound waves rather than traditional radio frequencies. While remotely operated vehicles handle the vast majority of modern deep-sea exploration, a small handful of specialized manned submarines have also been engineered specifically for extreme depth exploration, including vehicles like the Trest and the Deep-Sea Challenger that successfully carried human explorers directly down to the Challenger Deep itself. These manned vehicles require even more extensive safety engineering compared to unmanned alternatives, since any structural failure would obviously endanger the human crew members riding directly inside. Every successful expedition into the Mariana Trench, whether accomplished through remotely operated vehicles or specialized manned submarines, represents the culmination of decades of accumulated engineering knowledge, each mission building directly upon lessons learned from previous expeditions that occasionally encountered unexpected technical challenges along the way. This technology hasn't just enabled scientists to study the trench directly, it has fundamentally transformed our broader understanding of what conditions life can actually tolerate, information that scientists now believe extends in significance far beyond simply understanding Earth's own deepest ocean trench alone. Beneath a thick shell of solid ice, hundreds of millions of miles from Earth, an entire ocean of liquid water may be sitting in complete darkness, sealed away from sunlight for billions of years straight. This isn't science fiction or wild speculation. Scientists studying certain moons throughout our solar system have gathered increasingly strong evidence suggesting vast hidden oceans exist beneath the icy surfaces of specific moons, orbiting distant planets, hidden environments that might share surprising similarities to the extreme conditions found within the Mariana Trench. Europa, one of Jupiter's largest moons, represents one of the most promising candidates scientists currently study when searching for potential life existing somewhere beyond planet Earth. Beneath Europa's frozen, icy surface, scientists believe an enormous ocean of liquid water exists, potentially containing more total water than every ocean found across the entire surface of Earth combined. Enceladus, a considerably smaller moon orbiting Saturn, presents an equally compelling target for scientists studying potential extraterrestrial life. Spacecraft observing Enceladus have documented massive plumes of water vapor and ice particles erupting directly from cracks near the moon's south pole, providing direct physical evidence confirming a liquid ocean exists hidden beneath the moon's icy exterior. Both of these distant icy oceans share something remarkably significant in common with the deepest sections of the Mariana Trench. Complete isolation from sunlight, combined with the strong possibility that chemical energy alone might be sufficient to support life, entirely independent from anything resembling traditional photosynthesis. This connection explains precisely why scientists studying chemosynthesis within Earth's deep ocean trenches pay such close attention to research happening simultaneously within these distant icy moons scattered throughout our solar system. If bacteria can successfully build a complete thriving ecosystem using nothing but chemical energy extracted from methane and sulfur seeping through the Mariana Trench floor, similar chemical processes might theoretically support comparable life forms hidden within the sunless oceans found beneath Europa or Enceladus. Researchers studying hydrothermal vent systems within Earth's deep oceans believe these extreme environments offer an unusually valuable natural laboratory for understanding exactly what type of life, if any, might realistically survive within these distant icy moon oceans. The extreme pressure, complete darkness, and total dependence on chemical energy found surrounding Earth's own hydrothermal vents closely mirrors conditions scientists currently predict exist deep beneath the ice covering Europa and Enceladus. NASA and other major space agencies have specifically studied deep-sea ecosystems like those found within the Mariana Trench, while actively developing and refining search strategies intended for future missions exploring these distant icy moons. Lessons learned directly from chemosynthetic bacteria and specialized tube worms discovered near Earth's own hydrothermal vents help scientists develop increasingly accurate predictions about exactly what signs of potential life future spacecraft missions should actually search for once they eventually reach these distant ice-covered oceans. This connection reveals something genuinely profound about the true significance of exploring Earth's own deepest ocean trench. Scientists studying the Mariana Trench aren't simply investigating a remote, extreme corner of our own planet in isolation. They're potentially developing the exact scientific blueprint that future missions might eventually use to successfully search for life existing somewhere else, entirely within our solar system. An ocean 6 miles deep, hidden here on Earth, may ultimately help humanity successfully discover an ocean existing hundreds of millions of miles away, sealed beneath ice on some distant frozen moon. Deep within the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench, scientists have discovered something with significance extending far beyond simply understanding extreme biology. Potential new treatments for human disease. Organisms living in extreme deep-sea environments have evolved incredibly unique biological adaptations, specialized proteins, enzymes, and other complex chemical compounds specifically designed to function reliably under conditions no other organisms on Earth could ever realistically tolerate. Scientists studying these unique adaptations increasingly believe some of these specialized biological compounds might hold genuine promise for treating serious human diseases and medical conditions. This scientific field, sometimes called marine bioprospecting, involves carefully studying organisms collected from extreme ocean environments, specifically searching for biological compounds that might prove medically useful once properly understood and tested. Deep-sea organisms represent particularly promising research subjects precisely because the extreme conditions they've adapted to survive often force evolution to develop genuinely novel biological solutions rarely, if ever, found within organisms living in more typical environments. Researchers studying deep-sea bacteria specifically have already identified several promising compounds currently undergoing testing for potential medical applications. Certain bacterial strains collected from extreme deep-sea environments produce unique compounds showing early promise in laboratory testing against certain types of cancer cells, though this research generally remains in relatively early experimental stages, requiring extensive additional testing before any potential treatment could realistically reach actual patients. Beyond cancer research specifically, scientists studying deep-sea organisms have also identified compounds showing potential applications in fighting bacterial infections, particularly infections caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria that have increasingly become a significant growing concern throughout modern medicine. Because deep-sea bacteria evolved completely independently from bacteria commonly found on land, they've developed entirely different chemical defense strategies that human pathogens haven't previously encountered or developed resistance against. The extreme adaptations found specifically within snailfish and other pressure-tolerant deep-sea creatures also interest scientists studying completely different medical questions entirely. Researchers studying exactly how TMAO successfully protects proteins from collapsing under extreme pressure believe similar protective mechanisms might eventually help scientists better understand and potentially treat certain human diseases involving misfolded proteins, including serious neurological conditions where damaged protein structures play a significant role in disease progression. Marine bioprospecting research faces genuinely significant challenges, however. Collecting biological samples from extreme depths like the Mariana Trench requires expensive, highly specialized equipment and expertise, making large-scale sample collection considerably more difficult and costly compared to studying organisms found in more easily accessible environments. Additionally, many deep-sea organisms prove extremely difficult to successfully study or cultivate once removed from their extreme natural environment, since dramatically different pressure and temperature conditions found at the surface can potentially damage or completely destroy the very biological compounds scientists hope to study most closely. Despite these substantial challenges, scientists remain genuinely optimistic about the medical potential still waiting to be properly discovered within deep-sea environments like the Mariana Trench. Researchers estimate that the overwhelming majority of species living within extreme deep-sea environments haven't even been formally identified or scientifically studied yet, suggesting an enormous number of potentially valuable biological compounds remain completely unknown and undiscovered, hidden within one of the most extreme, least explored environments found anywhere across the entire planet. The same crushing pressure and extreme adaptations that make survival within the Mariana Trench seem almost impossible might simultaneously hold genuine answers to fighting some of the most serious diseases currently affecting human beings living thousands of feet above, here on the sunlit surface world. The Mariana Trench sits roughly 200 miles from the nearest populated coastline, buried beneath 6 miles of crushing ocean water in one of the most physically isolated locations found anywhere on the entire planet. Despite this extreme isolation, scientists studying the trench have discovered mounting evidence suggesting this remote ecosystem faces genuine, growing threats directly connected to expanding human activity, occurring thousands of feet above, sometimes originating from locations thousands of miles removed from the trench itself. Plastic pollution represents perhaps the most extensively documented threat currently facing the Mariana Trench ecosystem. Researchers studying amphipods collected from extreme trench depths have consistently found microplastic contamination present within the digestive systems of these small scavenging creatures, evidence strongly suggesting plastic pollution has already thoroughly infiltrated the base of the trench's entire food chain. This contamination carries potentially serious consequences, extending well beyond simply the amphipods themselves. Because amphipods occupy a foundational position within the broader trench food web, any toxic chemicals absorbed from ingested plastic particles could realistically work their way upward through the ecosystem, potentially accumulating at increasingly dangerous concentrations within predators that regularly consume amphipods as a primary food source. Beyond plastic contamination specifically, scientists have also documented concerning levels of various industrial chemicals and pollutants within organisms collected from extreme trench depths, evidence suggesting these harmful substances have travelled successfully through the same marine snow pathway that delivers essential nutrients to trench organisms living far below the sunlit surface. Climate change presents another significant evolving threat facing deep ocean ecosystems like the Mariana Trench, though the specific consequences remain considerably more difficult for scientists to accurately predict compared to more direct, visible forms of pollution. Rising ocean temperatures near the surface could potentially alter existing patterns of marine snow production and distribution, possibly changing precisely how much food eventually reaches extreme trench depths over time. Additionally, increasing carbon dioxide absorption throughout the world's oceans gradually increases overall ocean acidity, a chemical shift that could potentially affect various biological processes throughout marine ecosystems, including those found within the Mariana Trench itself. Scientists studying these mounting threats face a particularly difficult challenge precisely because the Mariana Trench remains such an extremely remote, difficult-to-access environment. Unlike coral reefs or coastal ecosystems, which researchers can study relatively easily and frequently through direct observation, studying the Mariana Trench requires expensive, highly specialized equipment, along with extensive advanced planning, making it considerably more difficult for scientists to properly monitor ongoing changes happening gradually over extended periods of time. This monitoring challenge means scientists still don't fully understand precisely how quickly this remote ecosystem might already be changing in response to expanding human environmental impact, or how much additional resilience the trench's unique organisms might actually possess when facing increasing environmental pressure and contamination over time. Despite the trench's extreme physical isolation from any populated coastline, mounting evidence increasingly confirms that no ocean environment found anywhere on planet Earth remains genuinely beyond humanity's expanding environmental reach, including even the single most remote, inaccessible location found anywhere throughout the entire world's oceans combined. Every creature living within the Mariana Trench shares one thing genuinely in common. Each species had to fundamentally reshape itself to survive conditions that would instantly destroy almost any other organism found anywhere else on the entire planet. Snailfish abandoned rigid bone structure in favor of flexible cartilage. Tube worms eliminated their entire digestive system, relying instead on bacterial partnerships housed directly within their bodies. Xenophyophores grew into single-celled giants by building elaborate shells from raw sediment. Each of these dramatic adaptations reveals something profound about the true nature of survival itself. Scientists studying extreme environments increasingly recognize that survival rarely depends on strength or toughness, in any traditional sense most people typically imagine. Instead, survival consistently depends on flexibility, on an organism's genuine willingness to abandon traditional biological structures whenever those familiar structures no longer serve any meaningful, practical purpose within a specific, challenging environment. This principle extends well beyond simply explaining biology found within the Mariana Trench. Throughout the broader history of life on Earth, the species that ultimately survived catastrophic environmental changes weren't necessarily the strongest or most dominant organisms existing beforehand. They were consistently the most adaptable, the species genuinely capable of fundamentally changing their basic biology, behavior, or entire survival strategy when previously stable, familiar conditions suddenly and dramatically shifted. The Mariana Trench essentially represents survival pushed toward its absolute most extreme limit, an environment where every single advantage useful literally anywhere else across the planet becomes almost entirely irrelevant. Speed doesn't particularly matter in crushing darkness. Traditional strength doesn't meaningfully help against pressure capable of instantly crushing solid steel submarine hulls. Sharp eyesight becomes essentially useless in a place sunlight will genuinely never reach. What actually matters at these extreme depths is something considerably more specific: precise, specialized adaptation to conditions found in this exact location. Adaptations refined gradually across millions of years of evolutionary pressure and natural selection, working continuously in one direction. A snailfish would likely struggle significantly to survive in a typical coral reef ecosystem. A typical reef fish would be crushed almost instantly if suddenly transported down into the Mariana Trench. Neither species holds any genuine universal survival advantage. Each merely represents the optimal solution for its own specific particular environment. This insight carries significant practical implications, extending well beyond simply understanding trench biology in isolation. As Earth's climate continues shifting and changing in response to a warming planet, species everywhere face increasing pressure to adapt rapidly to genuinely new, unfamiliar conditions, or otherwise risk extinction entirely. Studying organisms that have already successfully adapted to conditions as genuinely extreme as those found within the Mariana Trench offers scientists valuable insight into the actual biological mechanisms and processes that allow meaningful, successful adaptation to occur across genuinely challenging environmental change. The trench also offers a broader, more optimistic lesson, extending well beyond simply biology alone. Environments that initially appear completely hostile and impossible for supporting any form of life can still ultimately support thriving, complex ecosystems, provided life proves genuinely willing to fundamentally change and adapt in whatever ways prove necessary for survival. 6 miles beneath the ocean surface, in crushing darkness and pressure capable of destroying solid steel, life didn't simply find a way to survive despite those extreme conditions. Life found a way to genuinely thrive because of them, transforming seemingly impossible obstacles directly into the exact tools needed for survival. Despite decades of dedicated scientific research, the Mariana Trench remains one of the least explored, least understood environments found anywhere across the entire surface of planet Earth. Scientists estimate that humans have successfully explored only a genuinely small fraction of the trench's total area in any meaningful, detailed way, meaning entire sections of this extreme remote ecosystem likely remain almost completely unknown, potentially hiding species and biological adaptations scientists haven't even begun to properly imagine yet. This substantial knowledge gap exists primarily because of the extreme technical and financial challenges involved in conducting deep-sea research at these crushing depths. Every single research expedition capable of successfully reaching extreme trench depths requires highly specialized, expensive equipment along with extensive advanced planning and technical expertise, making large-scale, comprehensive exploration considerably more difficult compared to studying more easily accessible ecosystems located elsewhere. Researchers studying the trench continue regularly discovering entirely new species with each additional expedition undertaken, strong evidence suggesting the full scope of biodiversity existing within this extreme environment remains far from being completely catalogued or properly understood by modern science. Some scientists studying deep-sea biodiversity believe the majority of species actually living within extreme trench environments haven't even been formally identified yet, remaining completely unknown to science despite existing here on Earth the entire time. Beyond simply cataloguing unknown species, scientists also still don't fully understand many fundamental aspects regarding exactly how the broader trench ecosystem actually functions as an interconnected, complete system. Questions regarding precisely how efficiently nutrients and energy actually transfer between different species living at various trench depths, or exactly how vulnerable this extreme ecosystem might genuinely be when facing environmental change and increasing pollution, remain considerably difficult for scientists to answer with complete scientific confidence. The trench's extreme isolation, which helps protect various unique species from certain forms of direct human interference, simultaneously makes comprehensive scientific study significantly more challenging to actually conduct. Unlike more accessible ecosystems that researchers can study frequently and relatively easily, gathering meaningful, comprehensive data from the Mariana Trench requires expensive, specialized expeditions that can realistically only happen occasionally, leaving frustratingly large gaps in scientific understanding between each individual research trip conducted. Advancing technology continues gradually improving scientists' ability to study this extreme remote environment more effectively over time. Newer generations of remotely operated vehicles feature significantly improved cameras, more sophisticated sampling equipment, and increasingly capable sensors specifically designed to detect and properly document forms of life that previous generations of deep-sea exploration equipment simply couldn't reliably capture or identify. Despite this continuously improving technology, scientists studying the Mariana Trench readily acknowledge that comprehensive understanding of this extreme environment likely remains many years, possibly even decades away from being genuinely achieved. Each new expedition consistently reveals additional layers of complexity and previously unknown biological adaptations, suggesting the trench likely holds considerably more secrets than scientists have successfully uncovered so far throughout the entire history of Hadal research. This combination of remaining scientific mystery alongside genuine, ongoing environmental threats creates a particularly urgent situation for researchers studying the Mariana Trench today. Scientists find themselves racing to properly understand and document this extreme, unique ecosystem before expanding pollution and other human impacts potentially damage or permanently alter it in ways that remain difficult for anyone to accurately predict with confidence. The Mariana Trench might represent the single most extreme environment found anywhere throughout Earth's oceans, but it certainly doesn't exist in isolation from the rest of the planet's broader interconnected marine ecosystem. Scientists studying ocean systems increasingly recognize that extreme deep-sea trenches like the Mariana Trench remain genuinely connected to shallower, more familiar ocean environments through multiple interconnected pathways, creating a single, unified system, extending from the sunlit surface all the way down through nearly 7 miles of increasingly extreme conditions. The constant flow of marine snow drifting downward from surface waters represents perhaps the most direct, obvious connection, linking the trench to the broader ocean above. Nutrients and energy originally produced through photosynthesis occurring near the sunlit surface eventually travel downward through the entire water column, ultimately supporting complex food webs existing within the crushing darkness found at extreme trench depths. This means surface ocean health directly influences deep trench ecosystems, even though these two dramatically different environments might initially seem almost entirely separate and disconnected from each other. This connection also works powerfully in the opposite direction as well. Nutrients and chemical compounds cycling upward from extreme depths, sometimes released through processes like whale falls decomposing gradually, or chemosynthetic bacteria breaking down various compounds, can eventually work their way back upward through the water column, potentially influencing biological and chemical processes occurring within shallower ocean environments, located much closer to the surface. Ocean currents throughout the broader Pacific region also create meaningful physical connections directly linking the Mariana Trench to distant ocean environments located thousands of miles away. These currents help transport marine snow, organic debris, and unfortunately pollution as well, directly toward the trench from surprisingly distant locations, while simultaneously helping distribute nutrients and organisms outward from the trench toward other connected ocean regions. Migratory species traveling throughout the broader ocean also occasionally interact directly with trench environments, even though most familiar marine species obviously cannot survive the trench's genuinely extreme conditions found at its deepest points. Various species living within the trench's upper sections, considerably shallower than the crushing conditions found at the Challenger Deep itself, sometimes venture toward shallower waters located elsewhere, creating additional connections linking trench ecosystems to broader oceanic food webs extending throughout the wider Pacific region. Understanding these interconnections carries genuine, significant implications extending well beyond simply satisfying scientific curiosity about the trench in isolation. If human activities occurring in shallower, more accessible ocean regions continue significantly impacting marine snow production, ocean current patterns, or overall surface ocean health more broadly, those same changes will likely eventually reach the Mariana Trench as well, regardless of the trench's extreme physical isolation and remote location. This broader interconnected perspective helps scientists understand precisely why protecting ocean health requires genuinely comprehensive approaches extending across the entire interconnected ocean system, rather than focusing narrowly and exclusively on more visible, easily accessible coastal ecosystems alone. The Mariana Trench, despite sitting 6 miles beneath the surface and hundreds of miles removed from any populated coastline, remains genuinely, meaningfully connected to decisions and human activities happening constantly throughout the entire rest of the world's interconnected oceans. Protecting this extreme, remote ecosystem ultimately requires the same broader commitment necessary for protecting ocean health more generally, recognizing that no single ocean environment, regardless of how extreme or remote it might initially seem, genuinely exists in complete isolation from the rest of our planet's single, unified, interconnected ocean system. 6 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean surface, scientists have discovered something that fundamentally reshapes our basic understanding of exactly what life actually requires to survive successfully. Before extensive exploration of the Mariana Trench occurred, many scientists assumed extreme pressure, complete darkness, and total isolation from sunlight would naturally create genuinely impossible conditions for supporting any complex form of life whatsoever. The trench itself has thoroughly disproven that assumption again and again, revealing snailfish with bendable skulls, giant single-celled organisms building elaborate architecture from mud, an entire ecosystem successfully built entirely from chemical energy rather than traditional sunlight. Each individual discovery made within the trench connects directly to a broader, more significant scientific story, extending well beyond simply understanding deep-sea biology in isolation. TMAO, protecting delicate proteins from collapsing under crushing pressure, reveals fundamental new insights about basic protein chemistry, applicable throughout biology more broadly. Chemosynthetic bacteria building complete ecosystems without any sunlight whatsoever provides genuine, compelling evidence supporting the search for extraterrestrial life potentially existing within distant icy moons scattered throughout our solar system. Unique biological compounds discovered within extreme deep-sea organisms offer promising new potential pathways toward developing treatments for serious human diseases currently affecting people living thousands of feet above, here on the sunlit surface world. The trench also reveals something genuinely sobering regarding humanity's expanding environmental impact and reach. Plastic pollution discovered within amphipod digestive systems and radioactive fallout detected within trench tissue samples both demonstrate conclusively that no ocean environment found anywhere across the entire planet remains genuinely beyond human influence, including even the single most remote, physically isolated location found anywhere throughout Earth's vast interconnected oceans. Perhaps most significantly of all, the Mariana Trench offers a powerful, compelling demonstration regarding evolution's remarkable capacity for genuine adaptation and transformation. Every single creature living successfully within this extreme environment had to fundamentally abandon traditional biological structures and strategies that work perfectly well literally everywhere else across the planet, developing entirely new solutions specifically adapted for surviving conditions found nowhere else on the entire globe. This adaptability offers genuine hope, extending well beyond simply understanding trench biology in complete isolation. As Earth's climate continues changing and various ecosystems face increasing environmental pressure and disruption, the trench demonstrates convincingly that life possesses a remarkable, genuine capacity for successful adaptation, even when facing conditions that initially appear completely impossible for supporting any form of survival whatsoever. Scientists continue actively exploring the Mariana Trench today, gradually uncovering additional secrets with practically every single expedition successfully conducted. Each new discovery consistently adds another meaningful piece to an increasingly complex, fascinating puzzle regarding survival, adaptation, and the genuine boundaries separating what's biologically possible from what's genuinely impossible anywhere throughout our solar system. The trench reminds us that some of the most extraordinary discoveries don't necessarily require travelling to distant planets or faraway galaxies scattered across the universe. Sometimes the most remarkable, alien-seeming discoveries exist quietly right here on our own planet, hidden just 6 miles beneath the ocean's surface, patiently waiting for humans to develop the proper technology and genuine curiosity necessary to finally explore them directly. Imagine climbing directly into a submarine designed specifically to survive one of the most extreme environments found anywhere across the entire planet, beginning your own personal descent down toward the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The journey down alone would take several hours, descending gradually through distinctly different ocean zones, each one growing progressively darker and increasingly extreme the deeper your submarine continues travelling downward. Within the very first hour, sunlight would fade completely away, plunging your vehicle into permanent total darkness that will genuinely continue for the remainder of your entire journey toward the ocean floor. As pressure gradually builds relentlessly outside your reinforced hull, you'd likely begin noticing increasingly strange, otherworldly creatures drifting slowly past your viewing window, various bioluminescent organisms producing their own eerie, glowing light within the pitch-black surrounding darkness. Deeper still, you might catch a brief fleeting glimpse of a pale snailfish gliding calmly along, seemingly unaffected by pressure intense enough to instantly crush your submarine's hull if it ever failed even slightly. Finally reaching the trench floor after your lengthy, gradual descent, your submarine's external lights would illuminate a genuinely alien landscape, unlike literally anywhere else found across the entire planet. soft, undisturbed sediment stretching outward in every visible direction, occasionally interrupted by strange, elaborate structures built by xenophyophores, along with scattered tracks left behind by various scavenging amphipods actively searching for any available food nearby. If you managed to direct your vehicle toward one of the trench's scattered hydrothermal vents, you'd witness a genuinely bizarre, dramatic scene unfolding directly in front of you. Superheated water blasting violently out from cracks in the ocean floor, specialized tube worms and unusual shrimp species clustered together closely around the vent's opening, all thriving successfully within a narrow, precise temperature zone positioned between scalding heat and near freezing cold. Throughout this entire remarkable journey, you'd likely find yourself confronting a genuinely strange, humbling realization. Despite traveling to one of the most extreme, remote locations found anywhere across the entire planet, you still wouldn't have escaped humanity's reach completely. Microplastic fragments would likely drift slowly past your viewing window at various points. Radioactive particles from decades-old nuclear testing would remain preserved somewhere within the tissue of the organism swimming directly past your vehicle. Somewhere nearby, resting quietly on the ocean floor, you might even spot a discarded plastic bag. Eventually, after spending several hours exploring this alien, extreme environment, you'd need to begin your gradual ascent back up toward the sunlit surface world above, slowly leaving behind an ecosystem that successfully thrives in conditions that would instantly destroy your own physical body without the protection provided by your specialized submarine. Returning to the surface, you would likely never see the ocean, or perhaps even the entire natural world more broadly, in quite the exact same way ever again. 6 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean surface, in crushing darkness where pressure reaches levels capable of instantly destroying solid steel submarine hulls, life didn't just barely manage to survive, it found a way to genuinely thrive. A snailfish with a bendable skull instead of rigid bone, giant single-celled amoebas constructing elaborate architecture from ocean sediment, tube worms that eliminated their entire digestive system entirely, relying instead on bacterial partners housed directly within their bodies. An entire, complete ecosystem built successfully from chemical energy alone, completely independent from sunlight that will genuinely never reach this extreme depth. Every single adaptation discovered within the Mariana Trench tells fundamentally the same underlying story. Survival doesn't actually depend on raw strength or brute toughness, in any traditional sense most people typically imagine. Survival depends entirely on flexibility, on any organism's genuine willingness to abandon familiar traditional biological structures whenever those structures simply stop serving any meaningful practical purpose. This same fundamental principle extends powerfully beyond simply explaining trench biology in isolation. It reveals something profound and universal regarding survival more broadly, applicable across virtually any genuinely challenging or extreme environment, found literally anywhere throughout our entire universe. The Mariana Trench also reveals something considerably more sobering about humanity's expanding reach and environmental impact. Plastic bags resting quietly on the ocean floor, microplastics found consistently within the digestive systems of tiny scavenging amphipods, radioactive particles from decades-old nuclear testing preserved directly within living tissue. Even the single most isolated, remote ecosystem found anywhere across the entire planet has still been reached and genuinely affected by human activity occurring thousands of feet above. Yet the trench simultaneously offers something considerably more hopeful and optimistic as well. If chemosynthetic bacteria can successfully build a complete, thriving ecosystem using nothing more than chemical energy alone, similar biological processes might theoretically support genuine life within distant, icy oceans, hidden beneath moons like Europa or Enceladus, hundreds of millions of miles away from Earth itself. If snailfish can successfully survive pressure capable of instantly crushing solid steel, then studying their unique biological adaptations might eventually help unlock genuinely new medical treatments for diseases currently affecting people living far above, here on the sunlit surface world. The Mariana Trench ultimately proves something remarkably powerful and universal about the true nature of survival itself. Environments that initially appear completely hostile and genuinely impossible for supporting any form of life can still successfully support complex, thriving ecosystems, provided life proves genuinely willing to fundamentally adapt and change in whatever ways prove necessary. 6 miles down, in conditions that should make survival completely impossible, life didn't just manage to survive against impossible odds. Life adapted. Life transformed. Life found an entirely new way to exist, and in doing so, it revealed something remarkable extending far beyond simply the ocean's own deepest trench. It revealed exactly how far survival can genuinely stretch, when adaptation replaces resistance, and when life proves genuinely willing to become something entirely new in order to continue existing.